Emily had never been one for surprises, especially not at work. But as she stood at the entrance of the bustling Manhattan restaurant, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The evening shift had just started, and the usual dinner rush had begun to fill the space with chatter, clinking silverware, and the hum of distant conversations. The mood was lively, and the waitstaff moved fluidly between tables, balancing plates and drinks with practiced ease. But then, the door opened. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. A group of well-dressed men entered, their sharp suits giving off an air of power and importance. At first, Emily barely noticed them, focusing on her own duties. She had been a waitress here for almost 3 years, and it wasn't uncommon for the occasional celebrity or business mogul to pass through. But when she looked up, she froze. There, in the center of the group, was none other than Donald Trump. Her breath caught in her throat. Donald Trump, the former president, the real estate magnate, the controversial public figure. It was hard to miss him, with his signature blonde hair and imposing presence. The group was immediately escorted to a private table in the corner, away from the main dining area. Emily stood still for a moment, trying to regain her composure. She had served many famous people before, but this was different. It wasn't just that he was famous. It was that Trump was larger than life, a figure who seemed to dominate every room he walked into. And now he was here, in her restaurant, sitting only a few tables away from where she stood. Emily took a deep breath and gathered her thoughts. She wasn't a starstruck person. She had a job to do, and she had always prided herself on keeping her cool in any situation. Still, there was a strange knot in her stomach, a mix of nerves and excitement. This was her chance to serve him, to be part of something that felt important. Shaking off the thoughts, she grabbed her notepad and headed over to his table with the usual confidence she had honed over the years. She made sure her uniform was in place, her posture straight, and her face neutral, professional. As she reached the table, she paused, giving the group a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. My name is Emily, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tiny flutter in her chest. Trump looked up at her. His sharp eyes seemed to take in everything about her, from the way she held the notepad to the way she stood with quiet confidence. For a brief second, their eyes locked. Emily couldn't tell if it was just her nerves, or if there was something else in his gaze, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps, but it passed quickly. "Just water for now, thank you," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "Of course, sir." Emily quickly jotted it down. She turned to leave, but as she did, she heard his voice again. "Wait." She froze. "Yes, sir." He looked at her again, this time with a slight smile. "How long have you been working here?" Emily hesitated. It wasn't often that a customer, especially someone like Trump, asked about her life. She wasn't sure what he was looking for, but she figured she might as well be honest. "A few years," she replied, offering a polite smile in return. "I've been in the city for a while now. I moved here from Ohio." "Ohio, huh?" Trump leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression shifting into something more casual, almost friendly. "How do you like it here?" Emily couldn't believe this was happening. She'd read stories of celebrities or powerful figures being difficult, dismissive, or downright rude to the people serving them. But Trump was asking questions, interested, even. She wasn't sure what to make of it. "It's tough sometimes," she said, carefully choosing her words. "But it's worth it. I've got a son, and I want to give him the best life I can." Trump nodded, his expression softening for a moment. "I get that. Family is everything," he said. "You're doing the right thing. Keep pushing forward." Emily felt a strange surge of gratitude. The last few years had been hard on her, raising her son, Max, on her own, struggling to make ends meet. She wasn't used to hearing encouragement from people like him. In fact, she rarely heard it from anyone. But here he was, this man she had only ever seen on TV, offering a kind word. "Thank you, sir," she said, a little taken aback. "Don't mention it," he replied with a wave of his hand, returning to his conversation with the men at the table. She stood there for a second, unsure of what just happened. She had expected him to be more distant, maybe even dismissive, but instead, He had been kind, almost human. She quickly refocused, grabbing the water and hurrying back to the kitchen. But as she passed through the dining room, she caught sight of Trump again, laughing with his companions, the tension she had felt earlier now gone. She didn't know why, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a little lighter. As the night wore on, Emily couldn't help but replay the conversation in her mind. She had served a lot of high-profile customers, but this encounter was different. Maybe it was because, in that brief moment, Trump had treated her like a person, not just another server. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her think, maybe things are starting to change. And yet, as the evening wound down, Emily's thoughts drifted back to something deeper. She had always wondered what it would be like to have her life, her struggles, noticed by someone in power, someone like him. Little did she know, that night would mark the beginning of something neither she nor Trump could have ever anticipated. The noise of the restaurant faded away as Emily's thoughts drifted back to her life outside these walls. As she carried another tray to a table in the far corner, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, her hands moving on autopilot. This job, despite the long hours and the occasional celebrity sightings, was just a small part of the bigger picture. The bigger picture was a life she never quite envisioned for herself, but one she had come to accept. Emily's life in New York had started out full of promise. She had come here from Ohio, fresh out of high school, dreaming of a career in fashion or art, maybe even opening her own store one day. The city was a beacon of possibility, and she had no reason to believe she wouldn't make it. But things had a way of changing when you least expected it. At 23, Emily had gotten pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it was a surprise she had embraced. The father, Matt, was a fleeting figure in her life. He had promised to be there, but that promise had faded quickly. He'd left when she was 6 months pregnant, chasing a career opportunity in California. That was the last she'd heard of him. Being a single mother had its challenges. Emily quickly learned that the city, for all its opportunity, could be unforgiving. Max, her son, was the one good thing that had come from that brief relationship. His laugh, his small hands reaching up to her for comfort, were the things that kept her grounded. But it was hard, really hard. Some days she felt like she was barely keeping her head above water. She had moved into a tiny apartment in the East Village, a place that felt cramped even with just the two of them. But she made it work. Most days, Emily felt like she was drowning in responsibilities. There was never enough money, never enough time to go around. The hours she spent at the restaurant, long shifts with little reward, had become a constant. But she kept going. She had to. Max was everything to her. The thought of him made her heart swell with both pride and worry. At only 8 years old, he was already starting to show signs of his own intelligence, creativity, and curiosity. But he was also prone to being sick more often than other kids, and the bills had started piling up. The stress of caring for him, managing his appointments, keeping track of his medication, trying to give him a normal life, was exhausting. But Emily didn't complain. Not out loud, anyway. The world didn't have time for pity, and neither did she. She had learned that the hard way. If she wanted to survive, she couldn't waste time on self-doubt or fear. Every day was a challenge, and it was only by pushing through that she could manage to keep the small family she had going. Her mother, who had always been a pillar of support, had passed away the previous year. That had been a blow Emily didn't know how to recover from. Her mom had been the one to help care for Max when Emily worked late shifts. Now that she was gone, Emily had to take on everything alone. Some nights, when the apartment was quiet and Max was asleep, she would allow herself to mourn. But then, the next morning, it was time to get up and do it all over again. Emily's life had become a series of routines. Early mornings with Max, making breakfast and getting him ready for school, then heading to the restaurant for the long shift. She was exhausted, but she couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't afford to slow down. And then came that moment at the restaurant. The encounter with Donald Trump had caught her completely off guard. It wasn't just that he was famous. It was the way he spoke to her. The way he looked at her as though he saw more than just a waitress. She wasn't naive enough to think it was anything more than a passing moment. But still, it felt different. It made her wonder, even for just a second, if there was more to life than the constant struggle. But she couldn't let herself get distracted. She had to focus on Max, on her job, on surviving. Dreams had no place in her world anymore. As Emily brought another order to a nearby table, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the polished wine glasses on a nearby shelf. Her hair, pulled back into a tight ponytail, was beginning to show signs of wear. The bags under her eyes were darkening with each passing week. She wasn't getting any younger, and it seemed like the harder she worked, the further away her dreams slipped. "Excuse me, miss?" A voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up, meeting the eyes of a regular customer. "Sorry," she said, offering a quick smile. "What can I get you?" It was just a routine question, but as she spoke, she realized she had answered without thinking, without feeling. The motion had become automatic. Everything had become automatic. But not tonight. Tonight, everything was different. For a fleeting moment, Emily found herself wondering about the man she had served earlier, Trump. What had he meant when he told her that family was everything? What had he seen in her that made him take a moment to ask about her life? Was there something she was missing, something she couldn't see from her current perspective? She brushed the thought away. Focus, she reminded herself. Focus on the here and now. Max needed her. The bills needed to be paid. She didn't have time for daydreams. But just for a second, the idea of something more, something better, crept into her mind. The night had settled in deeper by the time Emily made her way back to the kitchen. She was tired, bone-deep exhausted, but the shift wasn't over yet. The restaurant was still bustling with customers, and there was always another table to attend to, another order to take. Yet, she couldn't shake the lingering feeling from earlier. The moment with Trump. It wasn't like she had any illusions about it. He was just a customer, just a fleeting moment in her day. But the kindness he had shown, it was something that stuck with her. Most people didn't pay attention to her life, not like that. Certainly not someone like him. And the words he had spoken kept echoing in her head. Family is everything. Emily had learned to guard herself against unrealistic hopes. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Life in New York was a constant balancing act between survival and ambition, and right now, survival was all that mattered. Still, there was something about that moment, something about him, that wouldn't leave her. As the evening wore on, she kept moving, serving plates, taking drink orders, and keeping up the usual facade of professionalism. But as the night began winding down, she made her way to Trump's table once more. The group was finishing up, and the conversation had slowed. Trump was still talking to his companions, but he caught her eye as she approached. "Another round of drinks for you, sir?" Emily asked, her voice steady but polite. "No, thank you, Emily," Trump replied, glancing up at her, a slight smile crossing his face. "But I think we're about done here." He waved off the final round of drinks, and the rest of the group nodded in agreement. Emily nodded back, about to turn away when Trump's voice called out again. "Hold on a second," he said. Emily paused. Was it her imagination? Or had his tone changed just a little? This time, there was a sense of finality in it, something that made her stop in her tracks. Trump reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, then handed it to Emily, along with a generous tip. "This is for you," he said, his voice low, though still kind. "You deserve it." Emily took the note from him, confused. But as she looked down, her eyes widened in disbelief. The note was a simple one, just a few short lines, written in black ink. "Emily, I can tell that you are doing your best, and I admire that. Life throws a lot at us, but don't forget to take a breath and believe that things can get better. You're stronger than you think. Donald Trump, ****. Emily stood there, frozen, the note trembling slightly in her hands. Her heart raced in her chest. The tip was more than generous, but that wasn't what had her stunned. It was the message. The words, simple as they were, carried a weight to them that she wasn't prepared for. It felt personal, as if he had seen through all the layers of her life. The exhaustion, the struggles, the endless fight to stay afloat. You're stronger than you think. For a second, it was as if everything around her stopped moving. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background. All she could hear was the steady beat of her own heart. Her breath hitched in her throat. She had never expected something like this. Never. She glanced back at Trump and his group. They were already standing, getting ready to leave, their conversation light, nothing out of the ordinary. But for Emily, everything had changed. She couldn't quite explain it, but the note felt like a small gift, something she didn't know she needed. The kind of encouragement she had been lacking for years. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if he heard her, but it didn't matter. The moment was already slipping away. She turned and walked quickly toward the back, the note still clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't want to cry, but tears were threatening to spill over. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt something stir inside her. A hope, a flicker of something beyond survival. In the small break room, she collapsed into one of the chairs, her hands shaking as she read the note again, over and over. "Stronger than you think?" she murmured to herself, as though repeating the words could somehow make them real, could somehow give her the strength she needed to keep pushing forward. Emily had never been the kind of person to rely on others for validation, but right now, she couldn't help but feel that this moment, this small gesture, had unlocked something deep inside her. She had to get back to work, but for a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes and just breathe. Maybe things could get better, she thought. Maybe there was more to life than this constant fight to stay afloat. As she wiped a tear from her cheek, she stood up, folding the note carefully and placing it in her apron pocket. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, she felt like something had shifted. Maybe it was just a note. Maybe it was just words. But for Emily, it was enough. The hours after Trump's departure felt like a blur. The usual rhythm of the restaurant returned, the clinking of glasses, the chatter of customers, and the hum of the kitchen in the background. Emily kept herself busy, working quickly to clear tables, take new orders, and ensure everything ran smoothly. Yet, despite her outward focus, her mind kept drifting back to the note tucked in her apron pocket. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The words had settled deep in her chest, a quiet echo of something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a long time. Hope. For someone like Emily, hope wasn't a luxury. It was a distant memory. She had long ago learned that survival was all that mattered. But here was a stranger, a man who had everything and more in his life, offering a piece of advice that felt almost too personal. "You're stronger than you think." As she walked back toward the bar to check in with the bartender, her fingers lightly brushed the pocket where the note was still hidden. She couldn't explain why, but the gesture had felt real, genuine, as if Trump had recognized something in her that no one else did. But why her? Why would he care? She had no answers, but for the first time in ages, Emily allowed herself to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward, a way out of this endless loop she had been stuck in. The next few days passed, and Emily tried to get back to her normal routine. But the note stayed with her, lurking in the back of her mind like a shadow. Every time she saw her son Max, every time she watched him play, or helped him with his homework, she thought of those words. Stronger than you think. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing this for him. Max was her world. She had to keep going, not just for survival, but for him to have a better life. Max had been asking more questions lately about his dad. At 8 years old, he was old enough to start noticing the absence of his father. Emily hadn't known how to answer him. She had always kept the truth about Matt as simple as possible. But Max was starting to feel the weight of it. On the evening of the 4th day after the note, Max was sitting on the couch, looking at his homework. Emily was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when Max spoke up. "Mom?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yeah, buddy?" Emily called back, chopping vegetables. Do you think Dad will ever come back?" Max's question hung in the air, full of hope and sadness all at once. Emily's heart sank. She had always promised herself she wouldn't lie to Max, but she wasn't sure how to explain the truth to him without hurting him. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to where Max was sitting. She knelt down in front of him, meeting his big, brown eyes. "Listen, sweetie, I know you miss your dad, and I know it's hard sometimes when he's not here. But the truth is, sometimes people don't always stick around. And that doesn't mean you're not special or loved. I'm here, and I always will be." Max looked down at his homework, a small frown on his face. "But I don't want you to be lonely, Mom." Emily's heart squeezed in her chest. She wanted to tell him everything would be okay, that the world wasn't as hard as it seemed. But she couldn't promise that. She couldn't promise him the perfect life, or that they'd always have enough money, or that he wouldn't feel the absence of his father for years to come. But what she could promise him was this: she would never stop fighting for him. "I'm not lonely, Max," she said, brushing his hair back gently. "I have you, and that's all I need." Max smiled up at her, his innocent face lighting up with relief. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. That night, after Max had gone to bed, Emily found herself sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the note again. She hadn't realized it before, but the words weren't just comforting. They were a challenge. "You're stronger than you think." It wasn't just a reminder that she was capable. It was a nudge to keep going, to believe that things could be different. It was the kind of encouragement she had never asked for, but now that she had it, she couldn't ignore it. But what did that mean? What could she do with this new sense of possibility? Emily didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living in the same pattern of struggle. Something had to change. For the first time in years, she started to think beyond the restaurant, beyond the paycheck that barely covered the bills. She thought about the possibility of a new job, something that might bring in more income. She thought about going back to school, finishing that art degree she had once dreamt of. Maybe she could even start her own small business. Nothing fancy, just something to create a future for herself and Max that didn't feel like it was constantly slipping through her fingers. She could feel the excitement of new possibilities bubbling up inside her. The idea seemed impossible, and maybe it was, but at least it was worth considering. "I am stronger than I think," she repeated silently to herself. Maybe it was time to believe it. And so, Emily started making plans. Small ones, at first. She looked into night classes for art, thinking about how she could juggle her current job with a few evening classes. She researched ways to sell her artwork online, taking small steps towards what she once thought was an impossible dream. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but now, she could see the faintest glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. The note had reminded her that she wasn't stuck. And for the first time in a long time, Emily was ready to believe it. The next week passed in a whirlwind of motion. Emily had started her evenings differently, carving out a few quiet hours after Max went to bed to work on her plans. She didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time, the idea of something new, something more, didn't seem like a fantasy. It felt real, within her grasp. She had signed up for an online art class, starting with the basics of digital art. It was a world she had dabbled in before, but had never truly explored. There was always something that came first: bills to pay, meals to cook, and a constant, overwhelming responsibility to survive. But now, her evenings were filled with color, shapes, and the rush of creativity. It was like rediscovering a piece of herself that had been buried under years of routine and hardship. Max noticed the change. He could see how much his mom had started to smile again. It was subtle at first, just a quiet hum of contentment in the kitchen as Emily prepared their dinners, or the way her hands moved faster as she drew at the kitchen table, her focus intense yet peaceful. She didn't know it, but every night, as she practiced, she was growing. And Max, in his own way, was growing too. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the restaurant, Emily came home to find Max sitting at the kitchen table, a drawing of his own in front of him. He had been doodling for hours, and the paper was covered in pictures of rockets, stars, and planets. "Look, Mom," Max said, excited. "I made a spaceship. It's for us. We're going to fly to the moon." Emily sat down beside him, taking in the messy, colorful drawings. They were simple, but there was something magical about them. Something about the way he viewed the world. Emily smiled, a warmth filling her chest. "This is amazing, Max," she said, brushing her hand gently over his. "Do you think we could go to the moon one day?" he asked, looking up at her with wide eyes. Emily chuckled softly. "Maybe. With a spaceship like this, I'm sure we could." Max's face lit up with joy. "We can make it happen, Mom. I know we can." The way he said it, with such certainty, reminded Emily of the promise she had made herself. She could make things happen. She could build something better for them. The future didn't have to be a cycle of endless struggle. It could be different. As the days went by, the shift in Emily was palpable. She felt more energized, more driven. She still worked her shifts at the restaurant, but now she was doing something for herself every day, even if it was just for an hour. Every new skill she learned, every piece of art she created, felt like a step toward the life she had once dreamed of. But life, as always, wasn't without its challenges. One Friday night, just after Emily finished her shift, she received a call from her landlord. There had been a mix-up with her rent payment. She had been late once before, and now the landlord was threatening to evict her. The words hit her like a punch in the stomach. She had been working hard to make ends meet, and now this. Her stomach twisted in panic. Rent was due in 2 days, and while she had made some extra money from her part-time art commissions, it wasn't nearly enough to cover the full amount. For a brief moment, it felt like everything she had been working toward, everything she had hoped for, was slipping away. But then, she thought back to the note. "You're stronger than you think." The words came rushing back, clear and undeniable. She took a deep breath, letting the panic settle before it could overwhelm her. "I can figure this out," she thought, her mind already turning to solutions. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. Emily pulled out her phone and started searching for local resources, emergency rent assistance, small loans, anything that could buy her some time. As she searched, her fingers paused on the screen. There it was. A local program offering help to single parents struggling with rent payments. The application process was quick, and the funds were available almost immediately. With a sense of urgency, Emily filled out the paperwork and submitted it. She kept her fingers crossed, praying that the application would be approved in time. In the meantime, she called her mom for moral support. "You're doing great, honey," her mom reassured her. "You're working hard, and you're doing the best you can. Just remember, we're all here for you." Emily smiled through the phone. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I would do without you." The next day, she got the call. The rent assistance had been approved, and the money would be transferred into her account in just a few hours. She almost burst into tears with relief. The weight that had been pressing down on her for days lifted, just enough to allow her to breathe again. That night, after Max had gone to bed, Emily sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on everything. She thought about how far she had come since that night with the note, how much had changed in just a few short weeks. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but she was learning, growing, and most importantly, she was fighting for something better. For Max. For herself. In the stillness of that evening, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had started to believe in something that felt almost impossible. A future. A real, honest-to-goodness future. She smiled softly to herself and whispered into the quiet night, "I'm stronger than I think." The days following the rent crisis felt like a breath of fresh air. Emily had always been good at finding ways to get by, but lately, it felt different. For the first time in a long while, she had a sense of stability, even if just for the moment. The rent assistance was a relief, but it wasn't a permanent solution. She knew she needed something more if she wanted to secure a better future for herself and Max. As she continued to balance work, her art, and raising Max, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was about to change everything. Little did she know that someone would come in the form of a familiar face. It was a Thursday morning when Emily's phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. She was sitting at the kitchen table, half distracted as she scrolled through social media while sipping her coffee. She had learned to start her day with a few minutes of calm before the whirlwind of work and life took over. But today, that calm was interrupted by a notification from the restaurant's Facebook page. A message from her manager, Sarah, popped up on the screen. "Emily, we need to talk. There's someone I think you should meet. Can you come in early today?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. Sarah was usually the no-nonsense type, so this message had to be important. She quickly texted back, "Sure, I'll be there at 3 p.m. As soon as she put her phone down, her mind began to race. Who could this person be? What could Sarah possibly want to discuss? The more Emily thought about it, the more anxious she became. She didn't have time to dwell on it, though. She had to pick Max up from school in an hour, so she shifted her focus to her son. Max's school was just a few blocks away, and Emily loved the short walks they took together. The walk was their time to chat about his day, hear about the new things he learned, and sometimes let their imaginations run wild. Today, as they walked home, Max was particularly animated. "Guess what, Mom?" he said, bouncing alongside her. "I drew a picture of a dog for art class today. It was the biggest dog ever. I think it could be a dog from space." Emily smiled at his enthusiasm. "That sounds awesome, Max. I'm sure it's the coolest dog ever. Maybe one day, we'll take that dog to the moon." Max's eyes lit up. "Really? You think so? That'd be so cool." Emily chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Anything's possible, kiddo." When they got home, she made a quick dinner and dropped Max off at his friend Lily's house for a sleepover. He was so excited to spend the night with his best friend, and Emily was glad to give him some time to unwind. She felt a pang of sadness as he ran off, but at the same time, she knew this was her chance to focus on what was next. At 3 p.m., she walked into the restaurant. The familiar sounds of plates clinking and the hum of conversation surrounding her. Sarah, her manager, waved her over from the bar. "Hey, Emily. Glad you could make it," Sarah said, her voice a little more upbeat than usual. "I want you to meet someone." Emily followed Sarah into the back office, where a man was sitting at a desk, sorting through some paperwork. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his neatly combed hair and confident posture immediately standing out. Emily couldn't help but feel a little out of place. "Emily, this is Robert. He's with a local art gallery, and he's been looking for an artist to showcase some new work. I told him you were the one he should talk to," Sarah said, her smile wide. Emily's heart raced. "An art gallery? Me? Nice to meet you, Emily," Robert said, standing up and extending his hand. His voice was calm and professional, but there was a warmth behind it that made Emily feel more at ease. "Hi, Robert. It's, nice to meet you too," Emily stammered, still trying to process what was happening. "I've seen your artwork on the restaurant's social media page," Robert continued. "Sarah has told me you've got a real talent for digital art. I think your style could be a great fit for a show we're planning next month. We're looking for up-and-coming artists, and I think you'd be perfect." Emily stood frozen for a moment, her mind reeling. This wasn't real. She had only started taking art seriously again recently. She wasn't a professional, not by any stretch of the imagination. But here was someone from a real art gallery, offering her a chance to showcase her work. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice cracking a little. Robert smiled. "Absolutely. I've looked at the pieces you've posted online. You've got something unique, something raw. We want to help you take that next step." Sarah, sensing Emily's shock, added, "I wouldn't have recommended you if I didn't think you could handle it. I've seen you work, Emily. You're more than ready." Emily's mind raced. She wanted to believe it, but the voice in the back of her head kept whispering doubts. She wasn't ready. She couldn't be. There was too much at risk. What if she failed? What if this was all just a dream that would come crashing down? But then she thought of Max. She thought about the way he believed anything was possible. He didn't have the self-doubt that she did. He believed in the impossible, and maybe she needed to start doing the same. "I'll do it," Emily said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and excitement. Robert grinned. "Great. We'll set up a meeting next week to discuss the details. We'll get everything lined up for the show." As Emily walked back to the kitchen, the weight of the conversation began to settle in. This was the break she had been waiting for, the opportunity to make something of herself, to take a step away from the endless cycle of survival and into the world she had always dreamed of. She stood for a moment in the kitchen, the hum of the restaurant around her, trying to gather her thoughts. She had done it. She had taken the first step. The rest of the path was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't matter. The future, as uncertain as it was finally within her reach. The next few days felt like a blur. The excitement from the meeting with Robert and the art gallery had filled Emily with a rush of adrenaline, but as the reality of what she had agreed to started sinking in, doubts began creeping into her mind. Was she truly ready for this? What if she wasn't good enough? She had never imagined herself as an artist who could showcase her work in a gallery. That had always been something for people who were really talented. People who didn't have to work 2 jobs just to get by. But then, every time her mind tried to steer her away from this opportunity, she remembered Max. She remembered the way he had looked at her, believing in her, when she had made him that promise about the moon. "I'm doing this for him," she whispered to herself as she stared at the blank canvas in front of her at the kitchen table. She had been practicing her digital art every night since the meeting with Robert, trying to develop a style that was uniquely hers. But every time she thought she was getting somewhere, the voice in her head reminded her that she was just a waitress, just a single mom. She wasn't someone who belonged in a gallery. Still, she didn't stop. Instead, she pushed through the fear, the uncertainty, and the constant urge to throw in the towel. She had made a promise, and she wasn't about to break it now. Later that week, Robert contacted her to schedule a meeting. They arranged to meet at the gallery the following Wednesday. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach as the day approached. It wasn't the art she was worried about. It was herself. Was she really cut out for this? Could she really make a living doing something she loved? The morning of the meeting, Emily dropped Max off at school, giving him an extra tight hug before letting him go. It was a simple gesture, but it felt important, like a reminder of the bigger picture. Her son's bright future was intertwined with her own, and she couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. When she arrived at the gallery, Emily was surprised by its elegance. It was a sleek, modern space, with high white walls and well-spaced lighting that highlighted the artworks on display. She felt completely out of place. But Robert was there to greet her, smiling warmly and immediately putting her at ease. "Welcome, Emily. I'm so glad you could make it," he said, extending his hand. "Thanks for having me," Emily replied, trying to steady her nerves. They walked through the gallery, Robert pointing out various exhibits, giving Emily a sense of what the space was like. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't stop thinking about her art. Was it good enough to be displayed in a place like this? Finally, Robert led her to a private office in the back, where they sat down to discuss the show. "We're really excited to feature you. We think you've got something special," Robert began. His words were kind, but they made Emily's stomach flip. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, unsure of how to take the compliment. "I'm still new at this. I haven't done anything like this before." "That's exactly why we want you," Robert explained. "You bring something fresh, something real. We're looking for unique voices, and I think your art speaks to that." Emily felt a warmth spread through her, but the doubts still lingered. "I just don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice wavering. "This feels big. Too big." Robert smiled and leaned forward slightly. "It's supposed to feel big. That's how you know it's something worth doing. But I wouldn't have reached out to you if I didn't think you were ready. The work speaks for itself. Now, it's up to you to let others see it." Emily nodded slowly, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to be that person who could walk into a gallery and feel at home. She wanted to be the artist she had always dreamed of becoming. "Okay," she finally said, her voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll showcase my work." Robert grinned, clearly pleased with her decision. "Fantastic. We'll start getting everything prepared for the show. You'll be in good company, and we'll help you every step of the way." As she left the gallery, Emily felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had done it. She had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. The uncertainty was still there, but it was quieter, overshadowed by something new. A sense of hope, a sense of possibility. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a single mom struggling to survive. She was an artist, and she was going to prove it. That night, after Max went to bed, Emily sat down at her computer, pulling up the digital art program she had been using. She stared at the blank canvas for a moment, the cursor blinking at her like an invitation. The fear was still there, but now it felt different. It wasn't paralyzing. It was a challenge, one she was ready to take on. She began sketching, letting her hand move freely across the tablet. She worked late into the night, losing herself in the art. With every line, she felt a little more confident, a little more sure of herself. The doubts didn't disappear, but she didn't let them control her anymore. She wasn't perfect. Her art wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that was all that mattered. As the first rays of morning light peeked through the window, Emily leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a step forward. She was ready for whatever came next. The days leading up to the art show felt like a whirlwind for Emily. She worked at the restaurant, continued to perfect her pieces, and spent every spare moment she could find practicing and adjusting the digital artwork that would be featured at the gallery. Each morning, she would wake up early before Max's school drop-off to paint. After work, she would stay up late, piecing together new ideas, tweaking old ones. The pressure mounted, but she found herself enjoying the process more than she expected. Her apartment, usually filled with the sound of her son's laughter and cartoons, had now taken on an almost sacred silence when she worked. It was a different kind of peace, one that only came when she was creating. The doubt that had plagued her in the beginning started to diminish as she saw the quality of her work coming to life. She wasn't just an artist because someone else said she was. She was an artist because she felt it in her bones. Still, there was a part of her that couldn't help but fear the unknown. How would the show go? Would people like her work? And more importantly, would they see the story behind the art? Would they understand the pieces were more than just digital creations? They were her thoughts, her struggles, her experiences. Max, being as perceptive as ever, noticed her quiet moments of doubt. "Mom," he asked one evening as they sat at the table coloring together, "are you nervous about your art show?" Emily smiled softly at him. "A little bit, sweetie," she admitted, brushing a lock of hair out of her face. "But it's okay. I think I'm going to be all right. Just like you said with your dog drawing, sometimes it's scary to try new things, but we can do it." Max grinned. "You're like that dog from space, right? You're going to be awesome. I just know it." The words hit her deeper than she expected. Maybe it was because he was so confident in her, so sure she could succeed, that she realized she had been holding herself back. It wasn't the fear of failure that was stopping her. It was the fear of succeeding and the responsibility that would come with it. But Max believed in her, and that was all the encouragement she needed. The night before the show, Emily couldn't sleep. She stayed up late packing up her artwork, carefully wrapping each piece in bubble wrap and preparing them for transport to the gallery. As she worked, she thought about how far she'd come. From a waitress barely scraping by to an artist preparing for her first gallery show. It was surreal, yet incredibly real at the same time. When she arrived at the gallery the next day, she felt a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling inside her. The walls were lined with white, awaiting the touch of color that would soon fill the space. The crew was busy hanging artwork, adjusting the lighting, and making sure everything was perfect. Robert greeted her with a smile and a handshake. "Hey, Emily. It's great to see you. Everything is looking amazing. You ready for tonight?" he asked, his voice steady and full of enthusiasm. "Yeah," she said, trying to keep the nerves at bay. "I think so. You've done the hard part. Your work is fantastic," Robert assured her. "Now it's about sharing it with others. We'll be here to support you every step of the way." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. She had done the hard part. She had taken the leap. Now, it was time to let others see what she had created. As the gallery doors opened later that evening, a flood of people filled the space. Emily stood near the back, quietly observing. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, not yet. This was her moment to watch, to see how her work was received by people she didn't know. She was nervous, yes, but there was also something liberating about being in this space, surrounded by people who shared a passion for art, for expression. The first few guests wandered around, admiring the pieces, chatting with Robert and the other artists in the show. Emily felt a gentle tug of nerves, but she forced herself to stay calm. She kept telling herself to breathe. This was her moment. She had earned it. And then, someone approached. A middle-aged woman with short, dark hair and glasses walked up to Emily, her eyes flicking to the artwork and then back to Emily. "This is your work?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly. Emily smiled, feeling her throat tighten. "Yes, it is." The woman's gaze lingered on one of Emily's pieces, a colorful, abstract representation of a stormy ocean. It was one of the first pieces Emily had created when she started embracing her art again, and she had poured a lot of emotion into it. "This piece is incredible," the woman continued. "There's something about it, the chaos, but also the calm. It's like you're showing both sides of the same story, the struggle and the peace that comes with it. Emily felt her heart race, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from a sense of validation, of being seen. That's exactly what I was trying to express, Emily said, her voice softer now. I've had a lot of chaos in my life, but I've also learned that there's always peace on the other side of it. The woman smiled. You've captured that perfectly. It's beautiful. As the night went on, more people came to Emily, complimenting her work and sharing how it had made them feel. The compliments were overwhelming, but not in a way that made her feel uncomfortable. They felt real, sincere. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she belonged, like she had found her place. When the evening drew to a close, Robert approached her with a grin. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice laced with excitement. Emily smiled back, her nerves replaced by a calm sense of accomplishment. "I feel good. I didn't expect this, but it's amazing. I didn't realize how much I needed to do this, for myself." Robert chuckled. "That's the beauty of art, Emily. It's not just for the world. It's for you, too." Emily looked around the gallery, at the people still chatting, admiring the work. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had truly found herself. The success of Emily's first art show sent waves of excitement and motivation through her, but it also opened the door to new challenges she hadn't anticipated. As the weeks passed, her name started to gain some recognition in the local art scene. Robert had been in touch, discussing possible future shows and exhibitions. The experience was both exhilarating and terrifying. Emily wasn't sure she was ready for all the attention, but a part of her knew it was an opportunity she couldn't afford to ignore. The next challenge came when an art magazine reached out to her for an interview. Emily had been featured as one of the up-and-coming artists to watch, and the writer wanted to know more about her journey, her inspiration, and her process. The thought of speaking to a reporter made Emily uneasy. She was not a public figure. She was just a woman trying to make something beautiful out of her life. She had never been one for the spotlight, especially not for something so personal, but she knew that turning down this opportunity could close doors that she had just started opening. Max could sense the unease in her when she received the email. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, looking up from his homework. Emily hesitated. "I have an interview with a magazine about my art," she explained, trying to sound casual. "They want to write about me." Max's eyes widened. "That's awesome. You're famous now." Emily laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, sweetie, I'm not famous, but it's a big deal for me. I've never really talked about my work in front of people before." Max looked at her seriously, his small face full of earnestness. "You should be proud. You worked hard. You're doing something that matters." The words hit Emily harder than she expected. Her son had a way of cutting through her self-doubt with a clarity she couldn't ignore. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and truly accept the journey she was on. After all, she was doing this not only for herself but for him, too. The interview itself was a blur of questions, words that felt like they were being thrown at her faster than she could process. But Emily held her own. She talked about how art had always been a form of escape for her, how it gave her a way to channel her struggles and triumphs. She explained how her journey had been one of rediscovery, that the hardest part wasn't creating the art but believing in her ability to do so. And most importantly, she shared how her son, Max, had inspired her to keep going, to chase the dream even when it felt impossible. The writer was kind and patient, offering her encouragement and praise as the interview came to an end. "You've got a real gift, Emily," the writer said before hanging up. "I think the world is going to be hearing a lot more about you soon." As she sat in her quiet apartment afterward, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, she was ready for whatever came next. The days following the interview brought more attention to Emily's work. Her social media followers began to grow, and people started reaching out with messages of support and admiration. Emily still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what was happening, but she had to admit it felt good to see her efforts being recognized. Yet, as things started to take off, Emily found herself facing an unexpected struggle. With more opportunities came more pressure. The more successful she became, the higher the expectations grew. Clients wanted custom pieces. Art shows were scheduled months in advance. Emily tried to balance everything: her restaurant job, being a mom, and maintaining her artistic career. But there were days when she felt completely overwhelmed. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the restaurant, Emily collapsed into bed, her body aching with exhaustion. Max was already asleep, and for a moment, she just lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The weight of it all pressed down on her, and she realized she hadn't taken a moment for herself in weeks. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Robert. "How are you feeling about the upcoming gallery show? Are you ready to showcase more pieces?" The message was well-intentioned, but all Emily could think was that she wasn't sure she could keep up. The pressure was mounting. She needed to keep producing new pieces, but each one felt more difficult than the last. It wasn't that she didn't love creating. She did. But she was starting to feel like her creativity was being consumed by the business side of things. She was constantly chasing deadlines and balancing demands, and it felt like the art was slipping away. The next morning, Emily woke up early, as she always did, to prepare breakfast for Max. But as she cracked eggs into a bowl, her mind wandered back to the night before. Was this what she had imagined when she dreamed of being an artist? Was it worth sacrificing her peace for success? Max's voice broke through her thoughts as he came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are we still going to the park later?" he asked, his voice full of hope. Emily hesitated for a moment. She had promised him, but with the amount of work piling up, she wasn't sure she had the energy to do both, to be present for him and to meet her deadlines. But looking at his eager face, Emily knew what she had to do. "Yes, Max," she said, smiling softly. "We're going to the park." The truth was, Emily had been so focused on chasing success that she had lost sight of what was most important. It wasn't the accolades, the recognition, or even the art shows. It was the people who loved her, especially Max. As they spent the afternoon at the park, Emily's heart lightened. Max ran ahead, his laughter echoing in the air as he played with the other kids. For a while, Emily let herself forget about the pressures of her growing career. She focused on the moment, the way the sunlight bathed the park in a golden hue, the joy on Max's face as he played, the stillness in her heart as she watched him. In that moment, Emily knew what she needed to do. She had to find balance. She had to take care of herself and remember why she started this journey in the first place. For her art, yes, but more importantly, for the love of her son. It was time to slow down, to pause and reassess. The work would always be there, but the moments with Max were fleeting. Emily made a promise to herself that from now on, she would take the time to appreciate both, her art and the people she loved. The weeks following Emily's decision to slow down were surprisingly transformative. She didn't entirely stop working. She simply prioritized her time better, balancing her art, her job, and her life in a way that felt more sustainable. Most importantly, she found joy in the small moments again, like mornings with Max, cooking together, and watching his face light up when he discovered something new. She still made time for her artwork, but instead of pushing herself to churn out pieces on a tight schedule, she allowed herself space to breathe. The creativity flowed naturally. Emily returned to her roots, rediscovering the pure love of painting and designing without the pressure of deadlines looming over her. She stopped seeing each piece as a product and began treating them like expressions of herself. One afternoon, as she sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee while sketching in her notebook, Emily felt a spark of inspiration like she hadn't felt in a long time. The feeling was electric, the kind that made her heart race with excitement. She started to work furiously, her fingers flying over the page. The designs took on a new, vibrant energy, and soon, she began incorporating elements that reflected her personal journey. The struggle she had overcome, the lessons she had learned, and the love she had found in the process. That night, when Max went to bed, Emily worked into the early hours of the morning. She created new pieces, more dynamic than anything she had made before. It felt like a breakthrough, the kind of creative freedom she had longed for. The pieces weren't just art anymore. They were her story. A week later, Emily received an unexpected call. Robert was on the other end of the line, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Emily, I've got great news," he said. "There's an art festival coming up next month, and they've asked me to curate a section for new, emerging artists. I'd love for you to be part of it." The invitation made her heart skip a beat. An art festival. It was a big step forward, a place where she could showcase her work to an even broader audience. Emily didn't hesitate. She knew this was the next step in her journey. "That sounds amazing," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I'd love to be part of it." "Perfect," Robert responded. "I've seen your latest work, and I know it's going to make a huge impact. This is your chance to show everyone what you're really capable of." With Robert's support, Emily spent the following weeks preparing for the festival. Her studio space, which had once felt like a quiet retreat, was now alive with color and energy. The new pieces she had created felt like they embodied a deeper sense of who she was as an artist and as a person. However, with this new opportunity came new challenges. Emily knew that being part of a major festival meant facing larger crowds and higher expectations. She could feel the weight of it, but there was something inside of her that refused to back down. This was her moment, and she was going to seize it. Max, as always, was her greatest cheerleader. He helped her pack up the artwork, and even at his young age, he seemed to understand the importance of what she was doing. "Mom, when you're famous, I'm going to be the first one to tell people you're my mom," Max said, his face full of pride as he held up a piece she had just finished. Emily smiled and tousled his hair. "You already are my biggest fan," she replied, "and that's the only fan I need." On the day of the festival, Emily arrived early to set up her space. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the hum of excitement as artists and attendees milled about, preparing for the event. The festival hall was massive, with long aisles lined with artworks ranging from paintings to sculptures to digital installations. As Emily unpacked her artwork and carefully placed each piece in its spot, she took a deep breath. It was surreal to be standing here, surrounded by so much talent, but she reminded herself that she belonged. She had worked hard for this moment, and now it was time to share her story with the world. Soon, the doors opened, and the festival officially began. People began to trickle in, walking past booths, admiring pieces, and engaging with the artists. Emily stood at her display, a little nervous at first, but soon, her confidence grew as visitors began to take an interest in her work. A couple approached her, both of them intrigued by the vibrant colors and abstract designs in her pieces. "I love the energy in these pieces," the woman said, pointing to one of the larger works on display. "There's a real sense of movement in the way the colors swirl." Emily smiled, grateful for the compliment. "That's exactly what I was going for. A sense of motion, of change. Life is always moving, and we have to learn to move with it." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I can definitely see that. There's something about your art that feels personal, like it's not just a painting, but an experience." Emily's heart swelled. This was exactly what she had hoped for people to feel the story she had poured into each piece. It was no longer just about the technique. It was about sharing her journey, her truth. As the day wore on, more and more people stopped by her booth. Each conversation felt like a small victory. She realized that it wasn't about being perfect or having her art accepted by everyone. It was about being authentic, about staying true to herself and her vision. By the end of the day, Emily was exhausted but exhilarated. She had made connections, shared her story, and, most importantly, felt like she was beginning to carve out a space for herself in the art world. But the real highlight came when a well-dressed man approached her booth, his eyes fixed on one of her pieces, the stormy ocean she had created a few months ago. He stood there for a moment, studying the piece, before turning to Emily. "I'm Michael," he said, extending a hand. "I'm an art dealer. Your work is exceptional. I'd like to discuss possibly representing you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was this really happening? Thank you," she stammered, overwhelmed by the moment. "I'd love to talk." As they exchanged contact information, Emily realized that everything had changed. She had started this journey unsure of where it would lead, and now she was facing an incredible opportunity, one that could shape the rest of her career. When she got home that night, Max was waiting for her, eager to hear about her day. "So, Mom, how did it go?" he asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. Emily grinned, pulling him into a hug. It went better than I ever could have imagined. And in that moment, Emily knew that no matter where this journey took her, she would always carry the lessons of her past with her. She had come so far, and this was just the beginning. As Emily continued to build momentum in her art career, the excitement and success brought with it a new kind of pressure. After the art festival, things started to move quickly. The art dealer, Michael, wasn't the only one who had expressed interest in her work. Gallery owners and other art professionals reached out, wanting to feature her pieces in their upcoming exhibitions. Offers to represent her came pouring in, and each conversation filled her with a mix of excitement and anxiety. For the first time in a long time, Emily found herself facing a crossroads, the kind of decision she had never imagined she'd have to make. Her life was moving in a direction she had once only dreamed about, but now that it was real, she found herself unsure. Was she ready for the responsibility? Could she handle the demands of a full-fledged art career while still being the mother she wanted to be for Max? The weight of these thoughts consumed her during the sleepless nights. The phone buzzed beside her bed, a reminder of the never-ending stream of opportunities that awaited her. But with each new opportunity, Emily felt the tug of something deeper inside, a need to stay grounded, to protect the balance she had fought so hard to find between her art and her family. As the day wore on, more and more people stopped by her booth. Each conversation felt like a small victory. She realized that it wasn't about being perfect or having her art accepted by everyone. It was about being authentic, about staying true to herself and her vision. By the end of the day, Emily was exhausted but exhilarated. She had made connections, shared her story, and, most importantly, felt like she was beginning to carve out a space for herself in the art world. But the real highlight came when a well-dressed man approached her booth, his eyes fixed on one of her pieces, the stormy ocean she had created a few months ago. He stood there for a moment, studying the piece, before turning to Emily. "I'm Michael," he said, extending a hand. "I'm an art dealer. Your work is exceptional. I'd like to discuss possibly representing you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was this really happening? Thank you," she stammered, overwhelmed by the moment. "I'd love to talk." As they exchanged contact information, Emily realized that everything had changed. She had started this journey unsure of where it would lead, and now she was facing an incredible opportunity, one that could shape the rest of her career. When she got home that night, Max was waiting for her, eager to hear about her day. "So, Mom, how did it go?" he asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. Emily grinned, pulling him into a hug. "It went better than I ever could have imagined." And in that moment, Emily knew that no matter where this journey took her, she would always carry the lessons of her past with her. She had come so far, and this was just the beginning. As Emily continued to build momentum in her art career, the excitement and success brought with it a new kind of pressure. After the art festival, things started to move quickly. The art dealer, Michael, wasn't the only one who had expressed interest in her work. Gallery owners and other art professionals reached out, wanting to feature her pieces in their upcoming exhibitions. Offers to represent her came pouring in, and each conversation filled her with a mix of excitement and anxiety. For the first time in a long time, Emily found herself facing a crossroads, the kind of decision she had never imagined she'd have to make. Her life was moving in a direction she had once only dreamed about, but now that it was real, she found herself unsure. Was she ready for the responsibility? Could she handle the demands of a full-fledged art career while still being the mother she wanted to be for Max? The weight of these thoughts consumed her during the sleepless nights. The phone buzzed beside her bed, a reminder of the never-ending stream of opportunities that awaited her. But with each new opportunity, Emily felt the tug of something deeper inside, a need to stay grounded, to protect the balance she had fought so hard to find between her art and her family. Max, as always, was her steady anchor. Despite the whirlwind of activity around her, he remained her calm. His simple joys, like building sandcastles at the beach or reading together before bed, helped her remember the things that truly mattered. But even Max's cheerful disposition couldn't shake the nagging fear that kept Emily up at night. It wasn't just the career that was causing her stress, it was the future. How would she navigate the growing expectations in the art world, while still staying true to the reasons she started in the first place. And what about the restaurant? Her job there provided the stability she had come to rely on, but was it something she could continue to juggle long-term? One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of back-to-back meetings with galleries, Emily walked into the small apartment she called home, feeling defeated. Max was at his best friend's house, and for the first time in weeks, she had a few hours to herself. The apartment felt emptier than usual, and the quiet echoed in her mind. She sat down on the couch and stared at the pieces of art around her, the ones she had created for herself, for Max, and for the world. It was an odd feeling to see them all together, knowing that each one carried a part of her soul. But she also felt conflicted. She had always loved the process of creating art, but now it felt like a business, something she had to perfect in order to make a living. The idea of being commodified made her uneasy. The phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a message from Robert. "I just wanted to remind you that the deadline for your next show is coming up. Have you finalized the pieces?" Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of how to respond. The pressure to perform, to meet expectations, was mounting. Emily didn't want to disappoint Robert, but the thought of rushing through her work again, without the pure joy she once felt in the creative process, made her stomach twist. She put the phone down and stood up, pacing the room. She needed a break. She needed time to figure out what she truly wanted. The answer, however, was not one that could be found in the rush of deadlines or the opinions of others. It had to come from within. A few days later, Emily took the day off from her restaurant job and decided to spend the day with Max. They went to the park, as they often did, and afterward, they grabbed ice cream. Sitting on the swings, with the sun shining down and the world moving around them, Emily felt a sense of peace that had eluded her in recent weeks. "I'm thinking of taking a step back," she confessed to Max, watching him swing higher. "I don't want to rush into things without thinking them through." Max slowed down and turned his head to look at her, eyes full of innocence. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there's a lot going on with the art stuff," she explained, trying to put her feelings into words. "But I don't want to forget what's important. I want to make sure that I'm doing this for the right reasons. I need to remember why I started in the first place." Max gave a thoughtful nod, his small face serious. "You started because you love art, and because it makes you happy." Emily smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "That's right. And because I want to be there for you, too." Later that night, when Max was in bed, Emily sat in her studio, staring at the canvas in front of her. She had been working on a new piece, but it felt different now. There was no deadline, no expectation, just her, the brush, and the blank space. She dipped her brush into the paint, and this time, it felt right. She wasn't rushing. She was simply creating because it was what she loved to do. The following week, Emily made an important decision. She would scale back on the number of shows she participated in, focusing on the quality of her work rather than the quantity. She would take her time to develop pieces that felt authentic to her, without the pressure of being constantly in the spotlight. The art world could wait. For now, Emily was going to focus on what brought her joy and peace, her art and her son. As for the restaurant, she decided that it would remain a steady part of her life for now. It was her source of income and stability, and it allowed her to be there for Max in a way that an unpredictable art career could not. She didn't need to abandon one dream to pursue the other. She could find a balance, a way to nurture both. A few weeks after her decision, Robert called again. He was excited about a new show opportunity, but Emily was calm this time. She was ready for the next step, but only on her terms. "Robert, I've been thinking a lot about my career," Emily said. "And I've decided to focus on doing fewer shows, but really diving deep into the work. I want to take my time, be more deliberate." There was a pause on the other end. "I respect that, Emily. I think it's important to stay true to your vision. And I know that whatever you do next, it will be incredible." It was a relief to hear Robert's support. Emily realized that she didn't have to do it all at once. She didn't need to prove anything. The journey ahead was hers to shape, and it didn't have to be rushed. And so, as the weeks turned into months, Emily's art continued to evolve. The pressure never truly disappeared, but she had learned how to face it, to take it on with grace, patience, and a deep understanding of what truly mattered. She was still Emily, the waitress-turned-artist. But now, she was also someone who knew that true success came from living authentically, both in her art and in her life. Emily's decision to slow down had brought a sense of peace, but that calm was soon tested by a new, unexpected challenge. It came in the form of a letter, a certified envelope with the return address of the city's largest art gallery. Her heart raced as she carefully tore it open, wondering what this new correspondence could mean. Had they seen her work at the festival? Was this another gallery opportunity? Or was it something else entirely? The letter inside was formal, the kind that usually indicated serious business. As she read, her stomach tightened. The gallery was planning a large-scale art exhibition focused on emerging artists, and they were inviting her to participate in a special project. The project was a collaboration with a well-known local art benefactor, someone whose name Emily had heard in whispers, a major player in the art world, known for both his sharp business acumen and his ability to make or break artist careers. The catch was this: the collaboration came with a hefty price tag. The gallery wanted Emily to submit a series of exclusive pieces that would be sold at a premium. The cost? A non-refundable upfront fee for the materials and curation process, plus the expectation that she would produce work that would meet their exacting standards. As she reread the letter, the reality of what was being asked hit her hard. It wasn't just about creating beautiful art. This opportunity came with immense pressure to deliver. She would have to meet deadlines, produce on demand, and work with a team that might not fully understand her creative vision. It was a chance to break into the upper echelons of the art world, but it also came with risks, financial and personal. She could feel the weight of it, the fear creeping in. Was she prepared to take on something this big? It was a significant financial investment, one that could drain her savings, leaving her with little to fall back on if the project didn't work out. Yet, at the same time, the opportunity was too big to ignore. This could be the chance she had been waiting for, the one that could launch her art career into a new stratosphere. For days, Emily wrestled with the decision. Max, as always, was her grounding force. He had no idea what was at stake, but his presence was a reminder of why she needed to choose wisely. She spent late nights in her studio, sketching and planning, trying to find a balance between the potential this opportunity offered and the fear of what could go wrong. Finally, one evening, she called Robert, knowing he would offer some guidance. He answered after just one ring, his voice calm and reassuring. "Robert, I need your advice," Emily said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I've been offered a major collaboration with one of the top galleries in the city, but the terms are intense. It's a big risk, financially and creatively. What do you think?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Robert spoke. "Emily, I think you're ready for this," he said, his voice steady. "I've seen your work evolve over the past few months, and I can tell you're at a point where you need a challenge. This could be your big break, but you need to go in with your eyes open." "You don't think it's too risky?" she asked, the doubt still lingering. "Risk is part of the game, Emily. You're not going to get anywhere if you don't take a few chances. But make sure you're prepared, financially and emotionally. Don't let the pressure to deliver cloud your vision. Stay true to your art, and the rest will follow." His words gave her the clarity she needed. Robert was right. She had spent too long waiting for the perfect moment, and it was time to take a leap of faith. The fear of failure was always going to be there, but if she didn't take the chance now, she might never get it again. After hanging up with Robert, Emily sat in the quiet of her studio, her mind racing. She knew this was a pivotal moment, a decision that could define her career for years to come. She needed to take control, to shape her path without being paralyzed by the weight of potential failure. The next day, Emily went to the gallery to meet with the curator and the benefactor behind the project. The gallery was a massive space, its white walls lined with beautiful pieces from renowned artists. It was intimidating to walk through, but Emily held her head high, determined to make a good impression. The benefactor, a sharp-eyed man named Charles Davenport, greeted her warmly. He was older, in his late 50s, with a carefully maintained appearance and a reputation that preceded him. "Emily, I've seen your work," he said, shaking her hand. "You have something special. I believe you're exactly what we need for this project." They walked through the gallery together, discussing the scope of the exhibition. Davenport explained that the collaboration would be high-profile, with the potential to attract the city's most influential art collectors. It was an exclusive opportunity, but one that came with the expectation of excellence. As they talked, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. It wasn't just about the art anymore. It was about making a name for herself, establishing her place in the competitive world of fine art. But would she lose herself in the process? Would she still be Emily, the artist who painted from the heart, or would she become just another product in the high-stakes art market? "I need to think about it," she said, her voice more certain than she felt. "I'll let you know my decision soon." After the meeting, Emily walked out of the gallery, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had no idea what the future would hold, but she knew that this decision would set the course for the next chapter of her life. Max, as always, was her anchor. He was waiting for her when she got home, eager to tell her about his day. The simple act of being with him, hearing about his little adventures, his friends, his world, helped Emily clear her mind. She realized that no matter what happened with her art career, she would always have him. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she knew that she had to move forward. It was time to face the unknown and embrace the risks that came with it. Whether she succeeded or failed, she would do it on her terms, and she would do it with the passion that had fueled her every step of the way. The decision to take on the major art collaboration was not one Emily made lightly, and the weight of it began to sink in the moment she signed the contract. The gallery's expectations were high. The pressure to create something extraordinary was almost palpable. Emily's studio, once a sanctuary of personal expression, now felt like a battleground for her creativity. Every brushstroke, every sketch, felt scrutinized not just by her, but by the art world at large. She spent days in the studio, working long hours into the night, fueled by coffee and the gnawing urgency of deadlines. The piece she was working on, a large, ambitious canvas she'd started months ago, was supposed to be the centerpiece of the exhibition, but something wasn't right. The colors didn't sing like they once had. The shapes felt too forced, too deliberate. Emily was caught in a loop of frustration, trying to meet the vision laid out for her, but feeling more disconnected from the process than ever before. In the evenings, when Max returned home from school, the world seemed to pause. His simple joys were a welcome distraction from the demands of her work. But even his laughter, the way he talked about his day, couldn't shake the stress that had settled in her chest. The art world was so different from the quiet, grounded life they had built together. The demands, the politics, the constant game of proving herself, it was exhausting. "Mom, when are we going to the park again?" Max asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, his small hands turning a toy car over and over. Emily looked at him, her heart heavy. She hadn't realized how much time had passed since they'd done something simple together. It had been weeks since they had gone to the park, weeks since they had shared an afternoon of nothing but sunshine and laughter. "We'll go this weekend, I promise," she said, trying to smile. But as she said the words, Emily felt the guilt twist inside her. How many promises had she made to Max lately that she hadn't been able to keep? How many days had gone by where she was too tired or too consumed with her art to give him the attention he deserved? It wasn't just her art career that was taking a toll on her. The restaurant, which had once been a steady source of income, now felt like a second job she didn't have time for. But she couldn't quit. The restaurant was her safety net, her anchor, and the steady paychecks allowed her to support Max, to give him a life that was comfortable, even if her dreams of becoming a full-time artist sometimes seemed out of reach. But the more time she spent at the gallery or working on commissioned pieces, the more she realized she was stretching herself too thin. There was a point where the art had to be about more than just the commission. It had to be about who she was as an artist. But who was she, really, in all of this? The Emily who painted for herself? Or the Emily who painted for an audience, for the critics, for the expectations of the art world? A few days after her conversation with Max, Emily made the difficult decision to take a break from the commission work. It wasn't a choice she made lightly, but she knew it was the right one. She could not pour herself into work that made her feel like she was losing touch with her own soul. She needed time to reconnect with what truly mattered. That Saturday, she and Max went to the park. The day was crisp and clear, and the sun sparkled off the surface of the lake. They walked hand in hand, Max chattering excitedly about everything from school to the new fish he had seen at the pet store. As Emily watched him run ahead, his carefree laughter echoing through the air, she felt a peace she hadn't felt in weeks. This was what mattered. This was the joy she had been searching for in the middle of all the chaos. Later, they sat on a bench, sharing an ice cream cone as Max told her about the new book he was reading. Emily listened intently, the worries of the world falling away. She realized, as she looked at him, that the pressure to succeed in the art world didn't define her. Max's love, their life together, that was her true success. That night, after Max had fallen asleep, Emily returned to her studio. This time, though, she wasn't chasing the approval of a gallery or an art critic. She picked up her brush and began to paint again, not for anyone else, but for herself. The piece came together in a way it hadn't before. The colors felt more vibrant, more true to her vision. For the first time in weeks, Emily could feel the connection between herself and her work again. She wasn't painting to meet someone else's standards. She was painting because it brought her peace. The next morning, Emily sat down to take stock of her life. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She was still facing the realities of being a single mother, managing a restaurant job, and trying to carve out a space for her art career. But she also realized that success didn't have to look like what the world told her it should. She didn't need to be famous. She didn't need to be the next big thing. She needed to stay true to herself, to her art, and to her son. By the end of the week, Emily made another decision. She would finish the gallery commission, but she would no longer sacrifice her happiness for the sake of deadlines. She would focus on the work that mattered to her, the art that felt authentic. If the gallery wanted that, great. If not, she would find another way. In a conversation with Robert, she made it clear that she would no longer take on every opportunity that came her way. "I've learned a lot in the last few weeks," she said. "I've learned that my art has to be about more than just the paycheck or the exposure. It has to be about the process, the journey of creating something that matters to me." Robert's voice softened. "I respect that, Emily. You've always been true to your art. And that's what makes your work so special." As the days passed, Emily settled into a new rhythm. She began to say no to projects that didn't align with her values, and instead, she focused on painting pieces that felt meaningful. The art world wasn't going anywhere. She didn't need to chase it. She simply needed to be herself, to create from her heart. Max, for his part, seemed to sense the change. He was more relaxed, his days filled with play, laughter, and adventure. And as for Emily, she realized that this balance, the art, the family, the simple moments with Max, was the true masterpiece. The decision to refocus her life had brought a sense of clarity, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Emily's art was flowing again, but now she faced another challenge: how to navigate the world of high-profile art exhibitions without losing herself. The gallery collaboration was still looming, with the deadline for submission fast approaching. But with each passing day, Emily began to feel a growing sense of dread. The closer she got to the exhibition, the further she felt from the work she was meant to be doing. She had spent hours in her studio, preparing for the show, trying to craft pieces that would meet the expectations of the gallery. But something was missing. The joy that had once fueled her creativity now felt like a distant memory, replaced by anxiety and the pressure to produce on demand. Her mind kept returning to the same question: was this really the path she wanted to take? One evening, after another long day of painting in the studio, Emily stepped outside for a walk. The cool breeze brushed against her skin as she made her way through the quiet streets of the city. The lights of the gallery flickered in the distance, a reminder of the world she was trying to break into. But the more she thought about it, the more she felt disconnected from it all. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Robert. "Let's meet tomorrow. I've been thinking a lot about your art and the path you're on. We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew Robert always had her best interests at heart, but the fact that he was reaching out now made her nervous. Was he going to tell her that the gallery was too big of an opportunity to pass up, or that she was letting her fears get in the way of her success? The next morning, they met at the same coffee shop where they had first discussed her art, a place that now felt like a symbol of her journey. Robert greeted her with a warm smile, his usual calm demeanor masking the weight of the conversation they were about to have. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but serious, "I've been thinking a lot about your work and where you're headed, and I'm concerned." Emily's stomach tightened. "Concerned? About what?" "About how you're approaching this exhibition," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I know you've been under a lot of pressure, but I think you've lost sight of something important. You're trying to fit into a mold that isn't you." The words hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She had been so focused on the external expectations, the deadlines, the prestige of the gallery, the need to succeed, that she hadn't stopped to think about what she truly wanted. "Robert, I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice wavering. "The exhibition is right around the corner. I've put everything into these pieces, but I don't feel like they are me. I'm scared I'm going to fail." "You're not failing, Emily. You're just at a crossroads," Robert said, his voice gentle. "You've always been true to yourself when it comes to your art. But now, you're letting the pressure from the outside world change what you stand for." The truth in his words was undeniable. Emily had been chasing validation, seeking approval from people who didn't truly understand her art. She had allowed the fear of failure to cloud her judgment, to pull her further away from her original vision. And now, as the deadline loomed, she realized that she didn't want to be part of the system that demanded conformity and perfection. "I don't want to lose myself," Emily whispered, her heart aching. "But I don't know how to step away from this." Robert reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. "You don't have to lose anything. Just remember why you started painting in the first place. It wasn't for fame or fortune. It was because you had something to say. Don't forget that." As Emily sat there, listening to Robert's words, a sense of clarity began to settle over her. She had been so focused on what others expected that she had lost sight of why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It was about creating art that was true to her, art that spoke to her soul. The next few days were filled with reflection. Emily took a step back from the exhibition, deciding to put her energy into the pieces she truly wanted to create. She no longer cared if the gallery accepted her work. What mattered was that she was creating for herself, not for anyone else. With renewed determination, Emily returned to her studio. She pulled out the canvas she had been struggling with for weeks and began again. This time, there were no rules, no expectations, just pure, unfiltered creativity. The strokes of her brush were bold and free, and for the first time in months, Emily felt connected to the art she was creating. As she worked, she realized that she didn't need the gallery's approval to be successful. She was already successful by staying true to herself. And as the hours passed, the painting began to take shape in a way it never had before. It was raw. It was honest. It was everything she had been trying to achieve, but without the pressure to conform. That evening, Emily looked at her work, her heart swelling with pride. It was no longer about the external rewards. It was about the process. It was about the joy she felt when she created something that was truly hers. The next morning, she took a deep breath and made a decision. She would still submit to the gallery, but she would do it on her terms. She would submit the painting that felt the most like her, the one that captured her soul, not the one that was molded to meet someone else's standards. She would take the risk, but this time, it would be a risk she was willing to take on her own terms. Whether the gallery accepted her work or not, Emily knew that she was ready to step into the next phase of her journey. It was time to trust herself again. The days following her conversation with Robert were a whirlwind. Emily felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had put the pressure of the exhibition behind her, and in doing so, freed herself from the fear of failure that had been gnawing at her. The constant worry about what the art world would think of her work had melted away, leaving space for something even more powerful, her own vision. She spent the next few days in the studio, working on a new painting. This piece was not for the gallery. It was not for anyone except herself. It was a reflection of the place she had come to, emotionally and creatively. As the brush strokes flowed freely, Emily could feel the weight of years of self-doubt lift. The colors blended together in a beautiful chaos that somehow made perfect sense to her. She felt like she was rediscovering the joy of painting, the joy that had first drawn her to the canvas when she was a young girl. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Max. "Can we have lunch together today? I miss you." A smile spread across Emily's face. It was rare that Max asked for her during the day. Between the restaurant and her art commitments, their time together had been limited. But today, she felt a sense of urgency. An urgency to reconnect, to nurture the bond that had become so precious to her. Without hesitation, she called him back. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Lunch with Max was a simple affair, but it was everything Emily had needed. They sat at a small cafe near the park, Max talking excitedly about his latest project at school while Emily listened, captivated by his enthusiasm. His joy was contagious, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to truly be present in the moment. As they finished their meal, Max suddenly grew quiet, his brow furrowing slightly as he looked at his mom. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Emily paused, taken aback by the question. She had been so consumed with her own struggles that she hadn't realized how much Max had been affected by it all. His simple question hit her harder than any criticism from the art world ever could. "I'm okay, Max," she replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. "I'm just figuring some things out." Max nodded thoughtfully, then smiled brightly. "Well, I think you're doing great. You're always painting and making beautiful things. You're the best mom ever." Her heart swelled with gratitude. In that moment, Emily realized that the love and support Max gave her every day was far more valuable than any gallery or exhibition could ever be. She was his hero, and that was all that mattered. That afternoon, Emily returned to her studio, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She no longer needed external validation. What she needed was to honor herself and her art. She picked up the canvas she had been working on and finished it, not with perfection in mind, but with authenticity. The painting was wild and vibrant, full of movement and emotion. It was everything she wanted it to be. With the piece completed, Emily sat back and admired her work. It wasn't just a painting. It was a reflection of her journey, her struggles, her triumphs, and her love for her son. The painting captured the essence of who she was in a way words never could. As she cleaned up her studio, her phone rang. It was Robert. "I wanted to check in and see how things were going," he said, his tone light. "Are you still planning to submit your work to the gallery?" Emily hesitated, then replied, "Yes, I've decided to submit it. But I'm submitting the painting that feels most like me, Robert. I'm not playing by anyone else's rules anymore. It has to be my art, or it's not worth sharing." Robert's voice softened, and she could hear the pride in his words. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd decide. Your work has always been about more than just selling or pleasing the crowd. It's about creating something that comes from your soul." Emily smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She didn't need anyone's approval to know that she was on the right path. The next day, Emily submitted her painting to the gallery. She felt a mix of anticipation and excitement, but most of all, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. No matter what the gallery decided, she had already won. She had rediscovered the art of creating for herself, and that was worth far more than any exhibition or accolade. Weeks passed, and life began to find a rhythm again. Emily spent more time with Max, enjoying the simple joys of their life together. She painted, not because she had to, but because it made her feel alive. And at night, as she tucked Max into bed, she realized that her greatest success wasn't in her career. It was in her ability to love and nurture the life they had built. Then, one afternoon, she received a phone call that would change everything. "Hello, is this Emily?" a voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Emily," she replied, her heart racing. "This is the gallery. We've reviewed your submission, and we're pleased to inform you that we'd like to feature your piece in our next exhibition. Congratulations." Emily's heart stopped for a moment, the words sinking in slowly. The gallery had accepted her painting. But even as the words registered, Emily knew something important. Her success wasn't about the gallery or the exhibition. It was about the journey she had taken to get here. The self-discovery, the struggles, and the choice to stay true to herself. As she looked out the window, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't done yet, but the path ahead was no longer filled with fear and doubt. It was filled with possibility. She had embraced the unknown, and now she was ready to step boldly into her future. The days after Emily's phone call with the gallery were a whirlwind of excitement, preparation, and a touch of apprehension. The gallery had not only accepted her submission, but they had also chosen her piece to be one of the focal points of the exhibition. It was a dream come true, but the more she thought about it, the more Emily felt like she was stepping into a world she wasn't entirely sure she belonged to. The morning of the exhibition, Emily woke up with a knot in her stomach. It wasn't the kind of nervousness she had once felt, the anxious energy before a big event. This was different. It was the feeling of stepping onto unfamiliar ground, of entering a space where the rules weren't quite clear, and the expectations felt overwhelming. Max had insisted on coming with her, his excitement contagious as he helped her load the painting into the car. "Mom, this is going to be amazing," he said, his bright smile never wavering. "I can't wait to see you on the wall." Emily chuckled, feeling a warmth spread through her at his unwavering belief in her. Max was her anchor, the person who always saw the best in her, no matter what. And today, he would be there, standing by her side as she faced the unknown. The gallery was everything she had imagined and more. It was sleek, modern, and sophisticated, with polished floors that gleamed under the bright lights. There was an air of reverence about it, as if every inch of the space demanded to be respected. As Emily walked through the entrance, she could feel the weight of the art surrounding her. The pieces in this space were stunning, meticulous, and often abstract. They were the works of people who had mastered the art of conforming to the expectations of the art world. She set up her piece in the designated space, a large, open area bathed in warm light. Her painting stood out among the others, its wild colors and chaotic strokes a stark contrast to the controlled precision of the other works. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was her work, her soul, laid bare for the world to see. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't controlled, but it was honest. "Emily, you've done it," Robert's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him standing behind her, his face glowing with pride. "This is incredible." "Thanks," Emily said softly, her voice a little unsteady. "I can't believe I'm really here." "You belong here," Robert said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This piece, it's raw, it's real. You've done something that not a lot of people are brave enough to do." Before Emily could respond, the gallery owner, a tall, polished woman with a sharp business suit, approached them. "Ms. Parker," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "your work is fascinating. We're thrilled to have it here." "Thank you," Emily replied, feeling her nerves rise again under the woman's intense gaze. She wasn't sure if the comment was genuine or simply a polite business gesture, but she forced a smile anyway. As the evening progressed, the gallery began to fill with patrons, artists, collectors, critics, and anyone who was anyone in the art world. Emily stood by her piece, her nerves flaring as people began to circulate around her painting. Some seemed intrigued, pausing to study the chaotic beauty of it, while others walked past it, uninterested. She tried not to let it bother her, but it was hard to shake the feeling that she didn't quite fit in with the crowd. Max, sensing his mother's unease, stood beside her, his hand tucked into hers. "You did great, Mom," he said quietly. "I think they really like it." Emily smiled down at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thanks, Max." As the night wore on, Emily found herself drifting from one conversation to another. She spoke with other artists, with gallery patrons, and with the occasional critic. Some offered compliments on her work, others questioned her unconventional style, but what surprised her most was how often people remarked on the emotional depth of her piece. "This is something different," one older man said, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of her painting. "It's like it's speaking to me. It's not just about the colors or the technique. It's about the emotion behind it. That's what makes it stand out." Emily found herself growing more and more comfortable with each passing hour. The tension she had felt earlier began to dissolve as she connected with people who seemed to truly appreciate the authenticity of her work. By the end of the evening, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. As the event came to a close, Emily and Max stood by the exit, ready to leave. She was exhausted, but also exhilarated. The evening had been a success, not because she had sold her painting or received an offer from a collector, but because she had stayed true to herself. She had put her heart on display, and that was enough. Robert approached her one last time, his eyes gleaming. "I knew you had it in you," he said, his voice filled with pride. "This is just the beginning, Emily. I can't wait to see where you go from here." Emily smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you, Robert, for everything." As they made their way home, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. She had stepped into a world that once seemed so daunting, and instead of shrinking back, she had claimed her place in it. No matter where her art took her next, she knew that she was on the right path, a path that was uniquely hers. Max looked up at her with a grin. "So, when's the next show?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. Emily laughed, pulling him closer as they walked. "We'll see, kiddo. But for now, I think we've earned a little break." As they walked home through the quiet streets, Emily knew that the journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face whatever came next, with her art, her heart, and her son by her side. The weeks following the exhibition were a blur of activity. Emily's painting, despite the gallery's initial reception, had sparked a few intriguing conversations, but no major sales had come from it. In a way, that didn't bother her as much as she thought it would. She had learned something much more valuable than any paycheck. The real satisfaction was in creating something true to herself, something that couldn't be measured by dollars and cents. But as the days passed, there was a growing restlessness inside her. The art world, the one she had been so eager to be a part of, didn't feel like home. It was not the validation she had once sought, nor was it the kind of fulfillment that would last. Emily knew deep down that she wasn't truly living for the acclaim or success. She had to confront something even deeper, a question she had been avoiding for years. What did she want from all of this? And why was she still so afraid to trust her instincts when it came to her art? One late evening, as Emily sat alone in her studio, the weight of her thoughts felt heavier than ever. Her studio was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of her air conditioning and the occasional brushstroke on canvas. She had been working on a new piece, a darker, more introspective work that she wasn't sure would ever see the light of day. It was a stark departure from the vibrant, chaotic energy of her previous painting, but it felt real, raw. Suddenly, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. Emily stood up, stretching as she walked toward the door, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. She opened the door to find Robert standing there, a warm smile on his face, but something in his eyes told her this wasn't a casual visit. "Hi, Emily," he said softly, his voice betraying a hint of concern. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, come in," Emily replied, stepping aside to let him in. She hadn't seen Robert in a few weeks, but his presence always seemed to ground her. They sat down in the living room, and Robert wasted no time. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, the one at the gallery. You said you were no longer trying to please anyone, but there's something I need to say. It's something I've been holding back for a while now." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She could tell that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. "What's going on, Robert?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands as he clasped them tightly. "I know that you've been struggling with this idea of success and what it means for your art, but I think it's time you stop letting your fears hold you back. You're a fantastic artist, Emily, and your work deserves to be seen, not just by critics, but by people who are genuinely moved by it." As they walked home through the quiet streets, Emily knew that the journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face whatever came next, with her art, her heart, and her son by her side. The weeks following the exhibition were a blur of activity. Emily's painting, despite the gallery's initial reception, had sparked a few intriguing conversations, but no major sales had come from it. In a way, that didn't bother her as much as she thought it would. She had learned something much more valuable than any paycheck. The real satisfaction was in creating something true to herself, something that couldn't be measured by dollars and cents. But as the days passed, there was a growing restlessness inside her. The art world, the one she had been so eager to be a part of, didn't feel like home. It was not the validation she had once sought, nor was it the kind of fulfillment that would last. Emily knew deep down that she wasn't truly living for the acclaim or success. She had to confront something even deeper, a question she had been avoiding for years. What did she want from all of this? And why was she still so afraid to trust her instincts when it came to her art? One late evening, as Emily sat alone in her studio, the weight of her thoughts felt heavier than ever. Her studio was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of her air conditioning and the occasional brushstroke on canvas. She had been working on a new piece, a darker, more introspective work that she wasn't sure would ever see the light of day. It was a stark departure from the vibrant, chaotic energy of her previous painting, but it felt real, raw. Suddenly, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. Emily stood up, stretching as she walked toward the door, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. She opened the door to find Robert standing there, a warm smile on his face, but something in his eyes told her this wasn't a casual visit. "Hi, Emily," he said softly, his voice betraying a hint of concern. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, come in," Emily replied, stepping aside to let him in. She hadn't seen Robert in a few weeks, but his presence always seemed to ground her. They sat down in the living room, and Robert wasted no time. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, the one at the gallery. You said you were no longer trying to please anyone, but there's something I need to say. It's something I've been holding back for a while now." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She could tell that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. "What's going on, Robert?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands as he clasped them tightly. "I know that you've been struggling with this idea of success and what it means for your art, but I think it's time you stop letting your fears hold you back. You're a fantastic artist, Emily, and your work deserves to be seen, not just by critics, but by people who are genuinely moved by it." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. "But what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not ready?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Robert's eyes softened as he leaned forward. "You're ready. You've always been ready. The question is, what are you afraid of? What's really holding you back?" A long silence filled the room. Emily didn't have an answer. She had spent years hiding from her true self, afraid that the world wouldn't accept her if she revealed all of who she was. But sitting there with Robert, the truth hit her like a freight train. The fear wasn't about her art. It was about her. She was afraid of showing the world who she really was, afraid that they wouldn't understand, afraid of being vulnerable. She had used her work to shield herself, to keep the world at arm's length. She finally spoke, her voice a little shaky but resolute. "I'm scared that if I show the real me, the real art that comes from my soul, no one will get it. No one will care." Robert reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. "But that's the beauty of art, Emily. It's not about being understood by everyone. It's about being true to yourself. If your work resonates with just one person, that's enough. If it moves you, that's enough." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She had been so focused on the idea of pleasing others, of proving herself to a world that demanded conformity. But now, sitting in front of Robert, she realized how much of herself she had kept hidden. It was time to stop pretending. The next morning, Emily woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She went to her studio and stared at the canvas in front of her. The painting she had been working on was still far from finished, but today, she knew what she needed to do. She had to let go of the fear that had been holding her back for so long. She had to paint for herself, not for the approval of anyone else, but for the woman she had become. As her brush moved across the canvas, Emily allowed herself to embrace the messiness of the work. She didn't worry about making it perfect or adhering to any set expectations. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to put her emotions into each stroke. It was a process of discovery, and it was beautiful. Later that afternoon, Emily received a call from the gallery. Her heart pounded in her chest as she picked up the phone, unsure of what to expect. "Hello, Ms. Parker." The voice on the other end began. "We wanted to let you know that we've decided to feature your new painting in our upcoming exhibition. We think it's powerful. It's exactly what we're looking for." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had finally created something that felt true to who she was, and now it was being recognized. But more than the validation, more than the acceptance from the gallery, what Emily felt was an overwhelming sense of relief. She had stopped hiding. She had shown the world who she was, and it was enough. As she hung up the phone, Emily looked at the painting on her easel. The colors on the canvas no longer seemed chaotic. They seemed alive. They told a story, her story, and for the first time, she felt proud of what she had created. That night, as Emily sat on her porch with a cup of tea, she thought about everything that had brought her to this point. The struggles, the doubts, the fear, and the eventual decision to embrace herself fully. She thought about Max, about Robert, and the quiet strength she had found within herself. She realized that she had come a long way, and while there would still be challenges ahead, she was no longer afraid of what might come. Emily had finally made peace with the one thing she had been avoiding all along, her own truth, and now she was ready to let the world see it. The days after Emily's phone call from the gallery felt like a whirlwind. It was as if the world was moving and fast forward, and she was finally learning how to catch up. The news about her painting being selected for the next exhibition was more than just a validation of her talent. It was a declaration of her rebirth as an artist. But even with this exhilarating turn of events, something in Emily felt different. There was an itch she couldn't quite scratch, a part of her that still questioned what this all truly meant for her future. Her studio was becoming her sanctuary. She spent long hours there, creating pieces that expressed the rawness of her thoughts and emotions. She had always felt like she was running away from herself, avoiding her true voice. But now, she realized, she had finally begun to understand it. Yet, even with the excitement bubbling up inside her, a sense of doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Was this the life she truly wanted? Was this the art she was meant to make? Max, who had grown accustomed to her late nights in the studio, had noticed the change in his mother. He had seen her get excited about her art before, but now there was a quiet intensity in her demeanor. She was determined, but there was also something weighing heavily on her heart that he couldn't understand. One evening, as Emily stood back to assess her latest painting, Max stood in the doorway of the studio, watching her in silence. "Mom, you okay?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. Emily turned, startled by the question. She hadn't realized he was standing there, and for a moment, she debated how much to say. Max was the one person who had always understood her, even when she couldn't put her thoughts into words. "I'm fine, Max," she said, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. "Just trying to figure out what comes next." "Are you scared?" Max asked bluntly, his brow furrowing as he studied her closely. "You've been talking a lot about the future and your paintings, but you seem unsure. You don't have to explain it if you don't want to, but I just wanted to ask." Emily's heart softened as she looked at her son. He was so perceptive, so intuitive. It was hard not to feel vulnerable in his presence. She took a deep breath, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I guess I am scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've worked so hard for this, for the recognition, for the success. But now that it's happening, I don't know. I'm not sure this is the life I really want. It's all so overwhelming, Max. I've always chased after approval, but now I'm starting to wonder if that's enough." Max stepped into the room and walked toward her, his small hand gently touching hers. "I think you're awesome, Mom. You don't have to worry about what everyone else thinks. Just keep making the art that makes you happy, and everything will work out." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. The simplicity of his words, the pure belief he had in her, was like a balm for her wounded soul. She pulled him into a hug, holding him close for a long moment, feeling the weight of the world lift slightly from her shoulders. "Thank you, Max," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You always know what to say." He smiled, his innocence and wisdom shining through. "I know you, Mom, and I know you're going to be just fine." The following weeks were a blur of preparations for the upcoming exhibition. Emily spent countless hours in her studio, refining her work, creating new pieces, and ensuring that everything was just right. Despite the deep conversations with Robert and Max, doubts still crept in, especially as the pressure of the art world began to mount. The expectations were high. People expected her to be more successful, more prolific, more visible. But the more she tried to meet those expectations, the more she felt like she was losing herself. Her paintings were now selling, slowly but surely. The gallery had set up several viewings for collectors, and some of her work had been sold to private buyers. But as the offers began to come in, Emily found herself hesitating. She had always dreamed of being a recognized artist, but now that it was happening, she felt conflicted. Was it her work that was being celebrated, or was it just the product she had become in order to succeed? One late afternoon, as she was working on a new piece, she received a call from the gallery. It was the director, asking her to meet the following day to discuss an opportunity that could expand her career further. Emily's heart raced. She had been expecting something like this, but she wasn't prepared for the uncertainty it stirred in her. The next day, she sat in the gallery director's office, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. The director, a sharp woman with a polished demeanor, wasted no time getting to the point. "We've been very impressed with your work, Emily," she began, her voice smooth and professional. "Your paintings have been well received, and we believe there's potential for you to expand your audience. We're offering you the opportunity to collaborate with a major art collector. They're interested in commissioning several pieces for their private collection. This could be a huge step forward for your career." Emily's stomach churned. She had worked so hard for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to do with it. The money, the fame, the recognition, it all sounded so appealing on paper. But as she sat there, listening to the director outline the details, she felt the creeping sense that she was being pushed into a mold that no longer fit. "I appreciate the offer," Emily said slowly, her voice steady but her mind racing. "But I need some time to think about it. This is a big decision." The director seemed slightly taken aback by her hesitation but nodded with understanding. "Of course. Take your time. We'll be in touch." As she left the gallery, Emily felt both relieved and burdened. She didn't want to turn down the opportunity, but she knew that the path she was being offered might not be the one she wanted to walk. That evening, as Emily sat at her kitchen table, Max came in from playing outside. He was holding a small piece of paper in his hand, and he waved it excitedly in front of her. "What's this?" Emily asked, smiling as she ruffled his hair. "I drew this for you, Mom," he said, handing her the paper. "It's a picture of you painting in your studio. I think it looks just like you know, the real you." Emily looked at the drawing. It was simple, but it captured something she hadn't seen in herself for a long time. A sense of joy, freedom, and authenticity. It reminded her of the reason she started painting in the first place. Not for recognition, not for success, but for the love of creating, for the truth of her own emotions. "Thank you, Max," Emily said softly, her eyes welling up again. She hugged him close, realizing that this was what mattered most. Not the fame, not the gallery deals, but the moments like this. The moments that reminded her who she was and who she wanted to be. That night, Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to let the art world dictate her path. She would continue to create, to share her truth, but she would do it on her own terms. The career, the accolades, the recognition, it would all come second to the joy of making art that was truly hers. As she sat in her studio, surrounded by the work she had poured her heart into, Emily knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. She had no idea where it would take her, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to find out. The weeks after Emily's decision to focus on her truth felt like a quiet revolution. Her life, once chaotic and filled with the demands of gallery shows, media attention, and art world expectations, now had a new rhythm. She had chosen to step back from the mainstream art world, not out of rejection, but out of a desire for something deeper. She no longer wanted to create for validation. Instead, she was painting for herself, and that felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. Her studio had become even more of a sanctuary. The door was always open to Max, who would often sneak in after school, his eyes lighting up when he saw her working. Emily had made it a point to spend more time with him, to listen, to guide, and to simply be present. She had always wanted to be the best artist for her son, but now she realized that her real goal was to be the best mother she could be. And in that quiet space between their conversations and laughter, she began to rediscover herself. One afternoon, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, looking over some sketches for a new piece, when the doorbell rang. It was a sound she had grown used to hearing. Most of her visitors were clients, collectors, or fellow artists, but today it felt different. She didn't expect anyone. She went to the door, and to her surprise, it was Robert. "Hey, Emily," he said, holding a small box in his hands. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I just wanted to drop by and see how you're doing." Robert's presence was always a source of comfort to Emily. The two of them had shared so many conversations about art, life, and everything in between. But this visit felt different. There was a new sense of openness between them, an understanding that hadn't been there before. She invited him inside, and they sat down at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking about you," Robert began, setting the box on the table, "about what you said the last time we spoke, about how you've been focusing on art that's true to you, not what others expect." Emily nodded. "It's been liberating, to be honest. I've been able to breathe again, to make the kind of art I want to make. But it's also a little scary, you know? Like, what if people don't get it? What if they don't care?" Robert smiled. "That's the thing about creating for yourself, though. It's not about whether other people get it. It's about whether it resonates with you. And that's the magic of art. You're doing something honest, and people will connect with that, whether you see it now or not." Emily sighed, her shoulders relaxing. Robert had a way of reminding her of the bigger picture. Sometimes, she got so caught up in the daily pressures and uncertainties that she forgot why she started painting in the first place. "Thanks, Robert," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It means a lot to hear that from you." He reached across the table, gently pushing the small box toward her. "I brought this for you. It's nothing major, but I thought you might like it." Curious, Emily opened the box, finding a small, hand-carved wooden figurine. It was a simple but beautiful depiction of a woman holding a paintbrush, her posture confident and proud. Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the figurine. It was a symbol of everything she had been striving for. The courage to be herself, the strength to create from the heart, and the willingness to take risks. It was a reminder that she was on the right path. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Robert." "You're welcome," he said with a warm smile. "I thought it might remind you that you're not alone in this. You have people who believe in you, who understand what you're trying to do. You've got this, Emily." As Robert left, Emily stood at the door, watching him walk away with a sense of peace settling over her. He was right. She wasn't alone. She had Max, Robert, and even the quiet whispers of her own heart to guide her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. A few days later, Emily received an email that shook her to her core. It was from the gallery she had turned down months ago, the one that had offered her a major opportunity with the art collector. The subject line read, "We'd love to have you back." Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the email. The message inside was simple, but it spoke volumes. "Dear Emily, we've been following your journey over the past few months, and we've been really impressed by your dedication to your craft. Your recent work has resonated with so many people, and we believe it's time for you to come back. We'd like to offer you a new exhibition slot, one that will truly showcase your artistic evolution. We're confident that this will be the perfect next step for you. We look forward to hearing from you soon." It took Emily a few moments to process what she had just read. The gallery, the place she had once been so eager to be a part of, was now asking her to return. It was an offer she couldn't ignore. But as she sat there, staring at the screen, she knew that the decision wasn't as clear-cut as it once had been. This wasn't just about the opportunity. It was about the path she wanted to walk. She thought about the figurine Robert had given her, about her conversations with Max, and about the art that now filled her studio. Emily knew she had changed. She had found something more valuable than the validation of critics or collectors. She had found her own truth. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She would respond to the gallery, but on her terms. She would accept the offer, but only if they allowed her to showcase the work that truly reflected who she was, the raw, unpolished art that came from the depths of her soul. If they were willing to meet her where she was, she would step back into the spotlight. But she wouldn't compromise the authenticity that had become her foundation. She sat down at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and typed her response. Dear gallery director's name, thank you for your kind words and the opportunity to return. I have spent some time reflecting on what I want my work to say and where I want my art to take me. If you're open to a new direction, one that stays true to my vision, I would be honored to showcase my latest work at your gallery. I want to create something that not only resonates with me but speaks to the people who experience it. I look forward to hearing from you soon. As Emily hit send, she felt a weight lift from her chest. This wasn't just a career decision. This was a declaration of independence, a commitment to herself and her art. It was the road less traveled, and she was ready to walk it. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like she was chasing something. She was creating it, and that was enough. The email had been sent. Emily sat back in her chair, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard. A strange mix of excitement and nervousness bubbled up inside her. The decision had been made, but now the waiting game began. She had thrown herself into something completely unknown, but that was exactly the point. She didn't want to go back to the life she had before, always striving for external approval and recognition. Now, it was about authenticity, about honoring her creative soul. As she walked away from the desk, she felt a sense of liberation wash over her. It wasn't just the response to the gallery's offer, it was everything. She was no longer chasing something outside herself, but instead creating a space where her art could be born from within. And that felt like the most honest thing she could do. Max, as usual, was waiting for her in the kitchen. His bright eyes followed her every movement. He had become Emily's biggest cheerleader through it all, often offering simple but profound wisdom that grounded her. Did you do it? Max asked, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread out in front of him. I did, Emily replied, her voice softer than usual. I said yes, but only if they let me show the kind of art that's really me. Max grinned. I knew you would. I'm so proud of you, Mom. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She could feel his belief in her, and it meant the world. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure what would come next. Would the gallery accept her terms? Would they even want her work? She had no idea. But there was something incredibly empowering in the fact that she no longer cared about those questions in the same way she once did. In the following days, Emily threw herself into her art like never before. The freedom she felt was intoxicating. She was painting not just with her hands, but with her heart, pouring all her doubts, fears, and triumphs into each brushstroke. Her studio had become a sacred space, filled with emotion and discovery. There were no more second-guessing her choices, no more fear of what others would think. Her pieces were raw, real, and vulnerable. They were her truth, and she loved them. One evening, as she stood in front of a new canvas, feeling the weight of everything she had poured into it, she received a response from the gallery. Her heart raced as she opened the email. It was from the director. Emily held her breath, but when she started reading, her eyes widened in disbelief. The director's message was warm and encouraging. The gallery was not only willing to accept Emily's new direction, they were excited about it. They loved the idea of showcasing her authentic work and felt it would resonate with a broader audience. They wanted to move forward with the exhibition, and they were ready to set up a meeting to discuss the details. Emily's hands shook as she read the final lines. She had done it. She had created the opportunity she wanted on her terms. There was no more compromise. She had made a commitment to herself and to her art, and it had paid off. Tears filled her eyes, but they were different from the ones she had shed before. These were tears of triumph, of peace. She knew now that this wasn't just about art. It was about the courage to live her truth, no matter the risks. Max had been out with his friends when the email came through, so Emily sat alone, absorbing the moment. She thought about how far she had come, about the twists and turns her life had taken. She had made mistakes, she had faced challenges, but she had also discovered strength within herself that she had never known existed. Robert had always been there for her, a quiet support through the toughest moments. But now, Emily felt like she was standing on her own 2 feet, stronger and more certain of herself than ever before. She thought back to the figurine Robert had given her, the simple woman holding a paintbrush. That symbol had stayed with her throughout this journey, reminding her of who she was and who she wanted to become. As the days passed and the date for the exhibition neared, Emily felt a quiet excitement build within her. This wasn't the culmination of her journey, it was just a new beginning. She had taken the first step towards something far more profound than gallery shows and sales. It was about creating from a place of authenticity, about sharing her truth with the world. The night before the exhibition opening, Emily stood before her completed works, now framed and ready for the event. Max had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the lights in the studio. She ran her hand over the frames, admiring the way the paintings came to life with the light. These works had all been created in the quiet moments of reflection, in the spaces where she could no longer run from her own truth. Tomorrow, she would walk into the gallery as an artist who was no longer pretending to be something she was not. She wasn't concerned about the critics or the collectors. She was just Emily, an artist, a mother, a woman who had finally learned to trust herself. The next morning, she took Max to the gallery with her. They stood together as the guests began to arrive, the excitement in the air palpable. Max squeezed her hand, his smile wide and full of pride. Emily glanced around at the guests, some familiar faces, some strangers, and she felt something stir within her. She wasn't just here to showcase her work. She was here to share her heart, to be open about the journey that had led her to this point. The opening was a success, not because of the number of sales or the glowing reviews, but because Emily knew that for the first time, she had painted with her soul. The connections she made that night were deep, meaningful. The people who stopped to talk to her weren't just admiring the art, they were moved by it. And that was enough. As the evening wound down, Robert stopped by the gallery to check in. He looked proud, but there was something else in his eyes too, something almost like relief. He knew, as she did, that this was a turning point for her. "You did it," he said quietly, standing beside her. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the joy she felt. "I think we both did." As the gallery doors closed for the night, Emily stood in front of her paintings, feeling a quiet peace settle within her. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she was walking it with courage. She was finally living her truth, and that was the most important thing of all. The days following the exhibition were a blur of activity. Emily's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, clients, and collectors, all eager to talk about her latest work. The gallery had been a hit, and her paintings had found their way into the homes of those who truly understood their meaning. Some of the pieces even sparked deep conversations about personal identity and artistic authenticity, which was exactly what Emily had hoped for when she created them. But amidst the success, Emily found herself retreating more often to her studio, seeking solace in the space where everything began. She could feel a shift in her energy, a sense that she was on the brink of something even greater, but she wasn't sure what it was yet. There was peace in the unknown, and for once, she wasn't in a rush to figure it all out. One chilly afternoon, Emily was in her studio, working on a new canvas, when she heard the familiar sound of the doorbell. It was a sound that had once signaled the arrival of critics or clients, but now it was different. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she wiped her hands on a rag and headed to the door. She opened it to find Robert standing on the other side, his usual warm smile lighting up his face. He wasn't alone this time. Beside him was a young woman with a camera bag slung across her shoulder and a notepad in hand. "Hey, Emily," Robert greeted, stepping inside. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. This is Sophia, a journalist from Art Today. She's been following your work for a while and wanted to do a piece on your journey." Sophia extended her hand, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's such an honor to meet you, Emily. Your story is so inspiring. I'd love to hear more about your artistic evolution and what's next for you." Emily felt a brief moment of hesitation. She hadn't been one to seek attention for her personal journey, but the truth was, she had been sharing it through her art all along. She had embraced vulnerability and authenticity in her work, and now, it seemed only fitting to share the full story behind it. I'd be happy to, Emily said, gesturing for them to sit. I think it's time to talk about where all of this has taken me. As the interview unfolded, Emily found herself telling the story of how she'd once been consumed by the desire for validation, the struggles of trying to fit into a world that expected her to conform. She spoke about the pivotal moment when she decided to stop chasing recognition and start creating art that reflected her truth. She talked about the doubts, the fears, and the incredible freedom she had discovered along the way. Sophia listened intently, her notepad filled with scribbles. Robert occasionally chimed in, offering a supportive word or reminder of how far Emily had come. It felt strange to speak so openly about her journey, but also incredibly freeing. As the interview went on, Emily realized that telling her story wasn't just for the public, it was for her too. It was a way to reflect on how much she had changed, how much she had grown. By the end of the conversation, Sophia was already taking pictures of Emily in front of her latest piece, a portrait of a woman standing in the midst of a storm, her eyes filled with quiet defiance. It was a fitting representation of Emily's own journey, a stormy path, but one where she had emerged stronger and more sure of herself. After Sophia left, Robert stayed behind, his usual comforting presence filling the studio. "So, what do you think?" he asked, leaning against the wall. Emily smiled. "I'm not sure what I expected, but it felt good. It felt like a full circle, sharing the story that brought me here, telling the truth that's in my heart. I think I'm ready to let the world see it." "You've always been ready," Robert said gently. "This is just the next chapter." A few weeks later, the article in Art Today was published. The headline read, "The Art of Authenticity, Emily Cartwright's Journey to Self-Discovery." It was a beautiful piece, capturing not only Emily's artistic evolution, but also the emotional depth behind her work. It was a reflection of everything she had fought for: the courage to follow her own path, the strength to paint without fear, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her art was no longer just a product, but a true expression of her soul. The response to the article was overwhelming. Emily was contacted by other galleries, curators, and even art schools, all wanting to collaborate with her or learn from her experience. But even as these new opportunities came flooding in, Emily remained centered. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She had already done that, not through accolades or recognition, but through the authenticity that poured from every brushstroke. Max, who had always been her constant companion through this journey, was thriving too. Emily could see the difference in him. He was more confident, more aware of the value of honesty in his own life. They had learned together that it was okay to be imperfect, to fail, to grow. Life wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning from them and staying true to who you were. One evening, as Emily sat at her desk reviewing some upcoming projects, she felt a quiet tap on her shoulder. She turned around to find Max standing behind her, holding something in his hands. "Mom, I think this is for you," he said, handing her a small piece of paper. Emily opened it to find a simple drawing. Max had sketched her, standing strong in front of an easel, a paintbrush in her hand. The image was raw, full of emotion, and somehow, it captured everything she had been feeling. In the corner of the paper, Max had written, "You taught me how to paint my own truth. Thanks, Mom." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she looked at the drawing. This was the moment she had always dreamed of. Not the recognition, not the acclaim, but this. This was the proof that her journey had been worth it, that she had passed on something far more important to Max than art. She wrapped her arms around him, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Max. You're the best thing I've ever created." As they hugged, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. She had come full circle. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And the road ahead? It was hers to walk.